She flinched at the creature's snarl. The human said, "He won't bite. He knows you're mine." The colony's main thoroughfare cleared like water parting before a ship's bow. Brad Rogers didn't need to look back to know why. Rock's claws scraped against the metallic plating with each step, a sound that sent shivers through anyone with functioning survival instincts. The creature stood nearly 8 feet at the shoulder, his scales the color of volcanic rock shot through with veins of deep crimson. Rows of teeth designed to shear through bone glinted behind lips that never fully closed. His eyes, amber and disturbingly intelligent, tracked every movement in the crowd pressing themselves against the prefab buildings. Brad kept his stride easy, one hand resting near the neural interface band on his wrist. He didn't need it, hadn't touched it in weeks, but the colonists didn't know that. "Clear the path," someone hissed from inside a doorway. "That thing shouldn't be in the colony. It's gonna kill someone." Brad let the words slide past. He'd heard worse. 3 months ago, they'd been screaming for someone to solve their predator problem. Now that he had, they wanted him gone almost as badly as they'd wanted the attacks to stop. The administrative building loomed ahead, its windows tinted against the planet's violet star. Director Palace had summoned him. Again. Probably another complaint from the council representatives about his unorthodox methods. They loved that phrase. Rack's head swung toward a merchant who'd stepped too far from his stall. The man froze, his gray skin draining to ash white. Brad's fingers brushed the creature's shoulder, and Rack's attention snapped back forward. "Easy," Brad murmured. The creature's rumble vibrated through his palm, acknowledgement rather than aggression. They climbed the steps to the admin building. The doors didn't open automatically. Brad waited, knowing security was scrambling to decide whether to let him in or evacuate the building. A full minute passed before the locks disengaged with a pneumatic hiss. The lobby stretched empty except for Director Palace standing beside someone Brad had never seen before. The director looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 months, his mandibles clicking with barely suppressed anxiety. But Brad's attention locked on the woman beside him. She stood with military precision, spine straight, hands clasped behind her back. Blue skin marked with silver patterns that traced her cheekbones and disappeared beneath the collar of her tactical uniform. White hair fell past her shoulders, pulled back from a face that could have been carved from ice. Pale eyes assessed him with the kind of analytical focus he usually saw in predators sizing up prey. Her gaze shifted to Rock and something flickered across her features. Not fear exactly. Calculation. "Commander Talyn," Palace said, his translator rendering his clicking speech into standard. "This is Brad Rogers, the specialist I mentioned." "The human with the pet," Talyn said. Her voice carried that particular crystalline quality some of the higher species affected. Brad had heard it before, usually right before someone tried to tell him how things were going to be. "Partner," Brad corrected. Rack shifted beside him, lowering his massive head to Brad's level. The creature's breath heated the air between them, carrying the sharp mineral scent of his last meal. Talon's fingers twitched, the first uncontrolled movement she'd made. "You've bonded with a Karathi apex predator," she said. "That's what the council calls them." "What do you call them?" "Survivors." She moved closer, each step measured. Her boots made no sound on the polished floor. Brad stayed relaxed, but his awareness sharpened. Military training recognized military training, even across species. "Director Palace has explained your methods," she continued. "You were contracted to eliminate the predator threat to this colony. Instead, you've brought one into our midst." The attacks stopped. Because they fear him. Because they respect territorial boundaries now. Talyn stopped 3 meters away, close enough to speak without raising her voice, far enough to react if Rack moved. "Smart. My government sent me to assess whether your contract should be terminated," she said. "And whether I should be removed from the planet. That possibility exists." Brad met her eyes. They were the palest blue he'd ever seen, like looking through ice into deep water. Something moved in those depths, quickly controlled. "You want to see what I do," he said, "or you already would have made your decision." Her jaw tightened fraction. "I observe before I judge." "Then observe." Rack chose that moment to move, padding forward with surprising silence for something his size. Talyn held her ground, but her shoulders pulled back, tendons standing out along her neck. The creature stopped within arm's reach, nostrils flaring as he tested her scent. "He won't bite," Brad said quietly. "He knows you're mine." The words hung in the air between them. Talyn's eyes snapped to his, wide with something that might have been shock or might have been something else entirely. "Yours?" she managed. "Under my protection," Brad clarified, though the heat that flashed through her gaze suggested she'd heard exactly what he meant. "Anyone in this colony falls under my protection. That's the deal." Rack completed his inspection and returned to Brad's side, apparently satisfied. Talyn drew a careful breath, and Brad watched her force control back over her features, like watching ice reform over disturbed water. "I'll need to accompany you," she said. "Document your methods for the council report." "Suit yourself. Director Palace has arranged quarters for me. I begin tomorrow at dawn." "We start before dawn. Then I'll be ready." She turned with parade ground precision and walked toward the exit. Brad noticed the way she angled her body to keep both him and Rack in her peripheral vision. Old habits. He respected that. Palace waited until she'd cleared the building before his mandibles started clicking rapidly. "Rogers, the council wants results. Real results, not just—" The floor shuddered. Brad's hand went to Rock's shoulder automatically. The creature's scales had risen along his spine, a threat display Brad had only seen once before. In the distance, something groaned deep beneath the colony's foundation. "What was that?" Palace whispered. The seismic monitors on the wall flickered to life, displaying data that made Brad's blood run cold. Multiple contacts, massive ones, all converging on their position from underground. "That," Brad said slowly, "is something bigger than Rack." The screens showed dozens of signatures, each one dwarfing his partner. They moved with terrible purpose through the planet's crust, rising toward the surface. Rising toward the colony. The council chamber felt smaller with Rack inside it. The creature had stationed himself behind Brad's chair, a living wall of scales and muscle that made half the representatives fidget. Talyn stood near the viewport. Her reflection ghosted against the violet-tinged darkness outside. She'd arrived at his quarters 2 hours before dawn, exactly as promised. Brad had been awake. He'd felt the tremors through the night, each one a countdown he couldn't quite calculate. "The seismic activity has intensified," Director Palace announced, his mandibles clicking with stress. 17 major events in the past 6 hours. The holo display showed the planet's crust in cross-section. Red markers converged on the colony like fingers closing into a fist. "We should evacuate," Counselor Vresh said. The Talaxian's gill slits flared with each word. "Protocol is clear. Unknown subterranean threats require immediate withdrawal." "We built this colony over 3 years," another representative argued. "The infrastructure alone can be rebuilt, lives cannot." Brad watched Talyn's reflection. She hadn't moved, but her attention had shifted from the viewport to the display. She was reading the data with the same intensity she'd used to assess Rack yesterday. "You're quiet, Rogers," Palace said. Every eye in the room turned to him. Rock's low rumble filled the silence. "I need to see what's coming," Brad said. "Absolutely not," Vresh snapped. "You'll take that creature out there and provoke—" "Something's already provoked," Brad interrupted. "Question is whether you want to know what before it arrives or after it tears through your colony." The chamber erupted into arguments. Brad let them argue, his focus on Talyn. She'd turned from the viewport now, those pale eyes locked on his. She tilted her head a fraction, a question he read clearly enough. "Enough," Talyn said. Her voice carried command like a blade, sharp enough to cut through the chaos. The council fell silent. "Mr. Rogers is correct," she continued. "We need reconnaissance. I'll accompany him." "Commander, your mission is to assess—" "My mission is to ensure this colony's survival," Talyn said. "I cannot do that from inside these walls." Vresh's gills snapped shut. "Fine, but if those signatures reach the surface before you return, we begin evacuation." Brad stood. Rock moved with him, a synchronized motion born from months of partnership. Talyn crossed the chamber, her movements fluid despite the tension Brad could see in her shoulders. "How soon can you be ready?" he asked. "I am ready. The terrain outside the colony is rough. I've operated in hostile environments across 17 worlds, Mr. Rogers." "Brad," she paused mid-step, "excuse me? If we're going into the wilderness together, use my name." Something shifted in her expression, too quick to identify. "Very well, Brad." The way she said it, precise and deliberate, sent heat through his chest. He pushed the sensation aside. They had work to do. The colony's main gate groaned open, releasing them into the violet dawn. Brad had packed light, water, supplies, weapons he hoped he wouldn't need. Talyn carried even less, just a compact rifle and what looked like military-grade scanning equipment. "You've done this before," he observed. "Field operations are standard in my training. Not with something like Rack following you." She glanced back at the creature prowling behind them. "No, not with something like him." The wilderness swallowed them quickly. The colony disappeared behind ridges of dark stone and twisted vegetation that looked more like frozen lightning than trees. Rack ranged ahead, testing the air, his scales shifting colors to match the environment. Brad had stopped being surprised by that particular adaptation. "He camouflages," Talyn said, "when he wants to. Why doesn't he now?" "Because we're not hunting." She processed that, her scanner painting their surroundings in blue light. Brad watched her work, noting the efficiency of her movements. No wasted energy. Everything calculated. It should have been cold, but something about her precision drew him, like watching a blade being forged. "The signatures are stronger here," she said, "concentrated." "How concentrated?" "Enough that they should be visible." Brad scanned the landscape. Nothing moved except wind-twisted vegetation. Then Rock stopped, his head swinging toward a cluster of rock formations. "There," Brad said. They approached carefully. The rocks weren't natural, too uniform, too deliberately placed. Talyn's scanner shrieked a warning half a second before Brad saw it. The skull was massive, easily twice Rock's size. The jaw alone could have swallowed a man whole. Mineral deposits had petrified it, turning bone to stone, but the teeth remained pristine, sharp, built for tearing. "By the ancestors," Talyn whispered. More bones littered the area once they knew what to look for. Some buried, some exposed by erosion, all enormous. "This happened before," Brad said quietly. Talyn's hands moved across her scanner. "These remains are old, centuries, perhaps millennia. But the pattern—" Her voice trailed off as she pulled up geological data. "The seismic activity matches historical records. There was a settlement here once, before the current colony." "What happened to it?" "The records simply stop." She looked up from the device, and Brad saw fear touch her eyes for the first time. "They all stop. No distress signals, no evacuation, just silence." Rack's warning growl made them both turn. The creature had backed against Brad's side, scales fully raised. The ground beneath their feet vibrated, a deep thrumming that built in intensity. "We need to move," Brad said. They ran. The terrain turned treacherous, loose stones sliding beneath their boots. Behind them, something cracked with the sound of snapping glaciers. Brad risked a glance back and saw the ground splitting, dark shapes moving beneath the surface. Talyn stumbled. Brad's hand shot out, catching her arm. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen, her body pressed against his, heat bleeding through their gear despite the cold air. Her eyes met his, wide and startled, before she pulled free and kept running. They didn't stop until they'd cleared the ridge and the sounds faded behind them. Both of them were breathing hard. Rack positioned himself between them and the threat, but his attention kept flicking back to Brad. "You saved me," Talyn said. "Instinct. My people don't trust instinct." "Maybe that's a mistake." She studied him, and Brad felt that gaze like a physical touch. "You're not like other humans I've met." "You've met others?" In diplomatic context, they were loud, emotional, unpredictable. "And I'm not. You're controlled, but it's not suppression, it's focus." She stepped closer, and Brad's awareness sharpened. "You feel everything. You just choose which feelings to act on." "Is that a problem?" "I don't know yet." The air between them felt charged. electric in a way that had nothing to do with the planet's atmosphere. Brad wanted to close the distance, to see if her skin felt as smooth as it looked, if those carefully controlled features would fracture under his touch. Rack's head pushed between them, breaking the moment. The creature's amber eyes held something that looked almost like reproach. Talyn laughed, the sound startled out of her. I think he's jealous. Protective, Brad corrected, but she might have been right. They made camp as the violet star set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Talyn worked on her scanner while Brad prepared food. Rack sprawled at the perimeter, watching the darkness. The data doesn't make sense, Talyn said finally. The creatures underground, they're not random. They're moving in formation. Like a military unit? Like a migration. Brad looked up from the heating unit. Say that again. Migration patterns follow specific routes generational memory passed through. She stopped, her expression shifting. They've done this before, these creatures. They've used these paths for thousands of years. And we built a colony directly in their way. Yes, they sat with that knowledge as the temperature dropped. Brad noticed Talyn's slight shiver, the way she'd drawn her knees up. He shrugged out of his jacket and held it out. I don't need. You're cold, take it. She accepted the jacket slowly, pulling it around her shoulders. It dwarfed her frame, and something about seeing her wrapped in his clothing did things to Brad's focus. Thank you, she said softly. We should rest. Tomorrow we head back, tell them what we found. And then we figure out how to survive what's coming. She held his gaze across the fire. Do you think we can? I think humans have survived worse, and I think you're tougher than you look. You barely know me. I know enough. The firelight played across her blue skin, highlighting the silver patterns. Brad forced himself to look away before he did something stupid, but he felt her watching him long after they'd both settled for the night. The council chamber had descended into chaos by the time they returned. Representatives shouted over each other, while Director Pallas tried desperately to restore order. Through the viewport, Brad could see colonists loading transports, panic evident in their rushed movements. We evacuate now, Vresh declared, slamming a clawed hand against the table. The signatures have multiplied. We're out of time. Brad stepped forward, Rock's presence at his back silencing the nearest arguments. Evacuation won't work. You don't have authority here, human. No, but I have facts. Brad activated the holodisplay, pulling up Talyn's scans. These creatures migrate through this area every few centuries. It's instinct, older than this colony, older than any of your settlements. They're not attacking, they're traveling. The distinction is meaningless if we're in their path, another counselor argued. Not if we redirect them. The chamber went silent. Vresh's gill slits flared wide. You cannot be serious? I've redirected Korathi apex predators. These are just bigger. By orders of magnitude, and underground, your methods are useless. Brad felt Talyn move beside him. She'd been quiet since they'd entered, but now she stepped into the light of the holodisplay. His methods saved this colony once. I recommend we listen. Commander, you were sent to assess his termination, not endorse his madness. I'm endorsing survival, Talyn said, her voice carrying that blade-sharp authority. Mr. Rogers has demonstrated unique capabilities with this planet's fauna. If there's any chance his approach could work, we must attempt it. Vresh turned to her, gills snapping. You would risk thousands of lives on a human's instinct? I would risk following protocol that leads to certain failure, yes. The words hung heavy in the recycled air. Brad watched Talyn hold the counselor's gaze without flinching. Something had shifted between yesterday and today. She'd seen the bones, felt the tremors, and made her choice. What do you need? Pallas asked quietly. Time, Brad said, and trust. We have neither in abundance. Then I'll work with what I've got. The meeting dissolved into logistics planning. Brad outlined his approach while Talyn provided tactical support, her military training evident in every suggestion. They worked in synchronization, anticipating each other's thoughts. More than once, their hands brushed over the display controls, each touch a spark of awareness. You're taking an enormous risk, she said when they'd finally escaped the chamber. They stood in the corridor outside his quarters. Rack had already disappeared inside, the creature's intelligence enough to give them privacy. It's what I do. Why? She moved closer, and Brad caught the scent of her, something like ozone and frost. You could leave, return to Earth, work somewhere safe. Could you? She smiled, small and genuine. No, I suppose I couldn't. Then you understand. Talyn's hand rose, hovering near his chest before falling away. My people would call this foolish, following feeling over logic. What do you call it? I don't know. I've never... She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. My species lives for centuries. We're taught that emotion is inefficient, that it clouds judgment. I've believed that my entire life. But watching you with Rock, seeing how that bond saved us in the field, her eyes met his. You feel everything, yet your judgment is clearer than mine. How is that possible? Brad reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away. His fingers brushed her cheek, tracing one of the silver patterns there. Her skin felt cooler than human, smooth as water. Feeling doesn't cloud judgment. Fear of feeling does. She leaned into his touch, a tiny movement that felt massive. I should go. Prepare my equipment. The word escaped before he could stop it. Talyn's breath caught, her eyes searching his face. Brad watched the war play out across her features, duty against desire, control against surrender. If I stay, she whispered, I won't want to leave. I know. She closed the remaining distance between them, her hand finding his chest. Brad felt his heart hammering against her palm. This is unwise. Probably. We barely know each other. We know enough. Her other hand slid up to his neck, fingers threading through his hair. The touch sent electricity down his spine. My people don't do this. We don't. Humans are so brief, so fragile. I'm here now. That broke something in her. Talyn pulled him down and kissed him with the intensity of someone who'd spent a lifetime suppressing every impulse. Brad's arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her against him. She gasped into his mouth, her legs encircling his hips as he carried her toward his quarters. The door slid shut behind them. Rack had made himself scarce, probably understanding more than any creature should. Brad pressed Talyn against the wall, breaking the kiss to trail his mouth down her throat. She arched into him, a sound escaping her that was pure need. Brad, she managed, her fingers digging into his shoulders. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. Tell me to stop. Don't you dare. They made it to the bed in stages, shedding gear and clothing between desperate kisses. Her tactical uniform revealed blue skin marked with silver patterns that traced her entire body like living art. Brad followed one line with his tongue, tasting frost and something sweeter. Talyn's back bowed, her control fracturing beautifully. I've never, she gasped as his hands mapped her body. No one has ever made me feel. He silenced her with another kiss, slower this time, thorough. When he finally entered her, she cried out in a language he didn't understand, her nails scoring his back. They moved together with increasing urgency, the careful control they'd both maintained burning away in shared heat. Later, wrapped in sheets with Talyn's head on his chest, Brad traced the patterns on her shoulder. Her breathing had steadied, but her fingers kept moving against his skin like she needed the constant contact. My superiors would call this compromised judgment, she murmured. What do you call it? The first real decision I've ever made. She propped herself up on one elbow, hair falling like a curtain of moonlight. I'm supposed to remain objective, file my report, follow protocol. Are you? I can't. Her hand pressed over his heart. Not anymore. Not when I've seen what you can do. Not when I... She stopped, something vulnerable crossing her face. Say it. Not when I'm falling for you. Brad pulled her down into another kiss, this one gentle, promising. Good, 'cause I need you with me tomorrow. Tomorrow. The migration reaches the surface at dawn. If we're going to do this, we do it then. Reality crashed back into their sanctuary. Talyn's expression shifted, military focus reasserting itself alongside something new, partnership. Tell me the plan. They spent the next hours strategizing, naked and tangled together, occasionally interrupted by touches that led nowhere and everywhere. Brad explained his theory about alpha hierarchy while Talyn calculated approach vectors. The combination of his instinct and her tactical mind created something neither could have achieved alone. "It's still incredibly dangerous," she said finally. "Yes, you could die. So could you, so could everyone in this colony." She straddled him, her hands framing his face. "Then we'd better make this count." They made love again, slower this time, memorizing each other with hands and mouths. When exhaustion finally claimed them, Brad held her close, listening to her heartbeat synchronize with his own. He woke to find her already dressed, checking her weapons with the precision he'd come to associate with her. She caught him watching and smiled. "Ready?" she asked. Brad rose, pulling on his gear. Through the window, the violet star was just beginning to lighten the horizon. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a reminder that time had run out. "Rock," he called. The creature emerged from wherever he'd been hiding, his amber eyes assessing both of them. If he judged what had happened between them, it didn't show. He simply moved to Brad's side, ready. "The Council has agreed to hold evacuation until we attempt contact," Talyn said. "But if we fail—" She crossed to him, rising on her toes to kiss him once more. "For luck." "I don't believe in luck." "Neither do I, but I believe in you." They left his quarters together, moving through the pre-dawn colony toward the perimeter. Colonists watched them pass, the human, the alien commander, and the creature that terrified them all. Brad caught whispers, saw fear and hope warring on faces. The ground shook harder. In the distance, the earth itself began to crack and heave. Something massive stirred beneath the surface, rising toward the light. "Here we go," Brad murmured. Talyn's hand found his, squeezed once, then released. They stepped beyond the colony's walls into the growing dawn, ready to face what came next. Together, the earth split open like a wound. Brad felt the rupture through his boots before he saw it, a tremor that started deep and climbed to the surface in waves of pulverized stone. 50 meters ahead, the ground buckled and tore, spilling creatures into the violet dawn that made Rack look like a hatchling. They came in silence, which somehow made it worse. No roars, no calls, just the grinding scrape of scales against rock and the thunder of their weight hitting solid ground. The first one cleared the fissure, and Brad's breath caught. It stood nearly 20 feet tall, built like a living siege engine. Its hide was darker than Rack's, nearly black, with ridges of bone plating along its spine. 7 signatures on approach, Talyn said, her voice steady despite the scanner shaking in her hands. More breaking surface to the east. Brad's hand rested on Rack's shoulder. The creature's scales had gone rigid, every instinct screaming at him to run or fight. Brad felt that tension vibrating through his palm. "Easy," he murmured. "We're not prey." 2 more creatures emerged, then 3. They moved with terrible purpose, their attention fixed on something beyond the colony. The migration route Talyn had identified cut straight through the settlement. Nothing personal. Just ancient pathways carved into instinct over millennia. "Command, this is Talyn," she spoke into her comm. "Targets confirmed, beginning approach." "Commander, we strongly advise," Vresh's voice crackled through static. "Talyn out." She silenced the device and looked at Brad. Fear lived in her eyes, but so did trust. "Last chance to reconsider," he said. "Not a chance." They advanced together. Rock moved ahead, his body language shifting from defensive to cautious. Respectful. Brad had seen it before when his partner encountered others of his kind, a complex dance that kept bloodshed theoretical. The nearest creature noticed them. Its massive head swung in their direction, nostrils flaring. Brad saw intelligence in those eyes, older and colder than Rock's. "Rock," Brad said quietly. "Show them." The creature moved forward alone, every line of his body communicating non-aggression. He lowered his head, exposing the vulnerable line of his throat. Submission, but not surrender, an acknowledgement of hierarchy. The larger creature studied him for an endless moment. Then slowly it returned the gesture. "It's working," Talyn breathed. More creatures emerged from the fissure. 9 now. 12. The ground shook with each arrival. Brad watched Rock navigate between them, his movements careful, deliberate. The creatures accepted his presence, some with more tolerance than others. Then the Alpha arrived. Brad knew it instantly. The others shifted aside, creating space. It rose from the earth like a mountain gaining consciousness, easily twice the size of the rest. Scars marked its hide, evidence of countless battles, countless years. When its eyes found Brad, he felt the weight of that gaze like gravity increasing. "That's the one," he said. "How do you know?" "Because he's looking at me like I'm either the biggest threat he's ever seen or the biggest fool." Brad moved forward. Talyn's hand shot out, caught his arm. "Wait." He turned, and she pulled him into a kiss that tasted like fear and desperation. "Come back to me." "Count on it." He walked toward the Alpha alone. Behind him, he heard Talyn's ragged breathing, the scrape of her boots as she forced herself to stay in position. Rack met him halfway, positioning himself at Brad's side. The Alpha watched their approach with those ancient eyes utterly still. 10 meters. 5. Brad stopped at what he hoped was a respectful distance. This close, the Alpha's size overwhelmed his senses. One swipe of those claws could end him. He pressed his hand to Rock's shoulder, then knelt. The gesture was purely human, purely instinctive. Brad had no idea if it would translate. But he lowered his head, made himself small, showed deference to something that had walked this world long before humans dreamed of the stars. The Alpha moved. Brad heard Talyn's sharp inhale, the whine of her rifle powering up, but the creature simply leaned forward, its massive head descending, until Brad felt hot breath against his hair. It inhaled deeply, learning him. Rock rumbled low, a sound Brad had never heard before, communication in a language older than words. The Alpha exhaled, and Brad felt the heat wash over him. Then it pulled back and lowered its own head. "By the ancestors," someone whispered through the comm. Brad rose slowly, maintaining eye contact. Respect, not submission. The creature's eyes held something that might have been approval. Brad turned, gesturing toward the east, away from the colony. The Alpha's head tilted, following the direction. Brad repeated the gesture, more emphatically. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Alpha moved, its massive body swinging east. The other creatures followed, their formation shifting. Brad pointed again, then began walking. East, along the ridge that would take them around the settlement. Rack fell in beside him, and behind them the earth shook as the Alpha followed. "He's doing it," Talyn said into the comm. "They're following him." Brad didn't let himself think about the impossibility. He just walked, trusting Rack to communicate what words couldn't. The colony grew visible in the distance, its lights bright against the dawn, thousands of lives depending on this working. The Alpha rumbled, a sound that vibrated through Brad's chest. It was slowing, the other creatures bunching up behind it. Brad's heart hammered. This was the test. The colony sat directly in their path. Instinct said go through. He was asking them to go around. He stopped, turned to face the Alpha. The creature towered over him, powerful enough to swat him aside like an insect. Brad held his ground. "Please," he said quietly, "trust me." The Alpha's eyes held his. Then it moved, but east, following the ridge line Brad had indicated. Relief hit him so hard his knees nearly buckled. The other creatures followed, one by one, their massive bodies redirecting around the colony. "It's working," someone shouted through the comm. Talyn appeared at his side, her presence solid and grounding. More are still emerging. "Then we keep walking." They walked together, following the herd as it redirected its ancient path. Rock ranged between them and the creatures, maintaining the connection. Hours passed. The violet star climbed higher. More creatures emerged and fell into formation. Brad's legs burned. Exhaustion pulled at him, but he didn't dare stop. Talyn stayed with him, her hand occasionally brushing his. "The colony is clear," she said finally, checking her scanner. "They're past the settlement boundaries." Brad looked back. The colony sat untouched in the distance. Between him and it, dozens of massive creatures continued their migration, their path altered by nothing more than respect and trust. "Not yet," Brad said, pointing ahead where the terrain opened into a vast plain. "Once they reach the flatlands, they'll maintain course, but we need to see them through." She nodded, and they kept walking. The creatures paid them little attention now, focused on their destination. The Alpha stopped at the edge of the plain. It turned, its massive head swinging back to regard Brad one final time. He felt the weight of that gaze, the acknowledgement in it. Then it moved forward into the open ground, and the herd followed. Brad watched until the last one disappeared, his body sagging with relief. Talyn caught him, her arms wrapping around his waist. "You did it," she said against his shoulder. He pulled her close. "We did it." Rack pressed against them both, his rumble vibrating through their embrace. Brad laughed, the sound punchy with exhaustion and triumph. The comm exploded with voices, Palace, Vresh, others. Talyn silenced it with a gesture. "We're coming back," she said simply. She looked up at Brad, her pale eyes bright. "Ready to face the council?" "With you always." They began the long walk back, Rack ranging ahead. Talyn's hand found Brad's, their fingers interlacing. For the first time since arriving on this world, Brad let himself believe he might have found something worth staying for. The council chamber felt different now. Maybe it was the way Palace stood straighter, or how Vresh's gill slits remained calm instead of flared with panic. Maybe it was Talyn's hand resting casually on the back of Brad's chair, a gesture of unity that hadn't existed days ago. "The migration has cleared the region entirely," Palace announced, displaying the seismic data. Sensors show no remaining signatures within 100 kilometers. "And the colony?" someone asked. "Untouched, 0 casualties, 0 structural damage." The chamber erupted in conversation, relief barely contained by decorum. Brad sat quietly, Rock's weight warm against his leg beneath the table. "Mr. Rogers," Vresh said, and Brad braced for criticism. Instead, the Talaxian's expression held something close to respect. "You have done what we believed unthinkable. The council owes you gratitude." "Just doing my job. Your contract called for eliminating predator threats. You've exceeded that considerably." Palace pulled up new documentation. "We'd like to extend your position. Permanent wildlife management with full authority to implement your methods across the colony." Brad glanced at Talyn. She met his eyes, a small smile playing at her lips. They'd discussed this possibility last night, wrapped around each other in the darkness. "I'll need expanded facilities," Brad said. "Space for Rock and potentially other partnerships. And a team." "Agreed. I'll also need a military liaison, someone who understands both tactical operations and wildlife behavior." Palace looked to Talyn. "Commander, would you consider—" "My orders are to return to the core worlds," she interrupted. "Submit my assessment and await new assignment." Brad's chest tightened. They hadn't discussed this part. Talyn's gaze remained fixed on Palace, her expression professionally neutral. "However," she continued, "I believe my assessment requires long-term observation. I'm requesting an extended posting to this colony." "The council would approve such a request?" Vresh asked. "The council will approve what I tell them to approve." Steele edged her words. "I'm recommending this colony as a model for human-alien cooperation. That requires my continued presence to document and facilitate." "Then we're fortunate to have you both," Palace said. The meeting dissolved into logistics. Brad barely heard it, too focused on Talyn's profile, the set of her shoulders. She'd just chosen him, chosen this. Abandoned whatever prestigious position waited on the core worlds to stay on a frontier colony with a human she'd met less than a week ago. When the council finally dismissed them, Brad caught her arm in the corridor. "You didn't have to do that." "We'll survive." She turned to face him fully. "Brad, I've spent 2 centuries following protocol, pursuing advancement, being what my people expected. And in 5 days with you, I've felt more alive than in all those years combined." 2 centuries? The number stunned him. "I'm young by my species' standards. I have centuries ahead of me." Her hand rose to his chest. "I could spend them climbing ranks, earning honors, checking boxes, or I could spend them here, doing something that matters, with someone who matters." Brad pulled her into a kiss that probably violated several diplomatic protocols. She melted against him, her fingers threading through his hair. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she smiled. "Take me home," she said. "Your quarters are mine." "Ours." They'd already started combining their spaces, her equipment mixing with his gear. Rock had accepted her presence completely, sometimes positioning himself between them like a jealous sibling. The creature waited outside Brad's quarters now, his expression inscrutable. Talyn paused to run her hand along his scales, the gesture natural. "Thank you," she told him, "for sharing him with me." Rack's rumble sounded almost amused. Inside, Talyn shed her uniform with practiced efficiency. Brad watched from the bed, appreciating the way light played across her blue skin. She caught him staring and raised an eyebrow. "Like what you see?" "You know I do." She crossed to him, straddling his lap. Her hands framed his face, thumbs tracing his cheekbones. "I love you." The words stopped his breath. They danced around it, implied it, shown it in countless ways. But hearing it stated plainly cracked something open in his chest. "I love you too," he said. She kissed him deeply, thoroughly, taking her time. When she pulled back, her eyes shone. "My people don't fall in love easily. When we do, it's forever. You need to understand that. I'm human. I'll be gone in a handful of your decades. Then I'll love you for every moment of those decades, and I'll carry you with me for the centuries after." Her voice held fierce certainty. "Unless you're planning to die on me anytime soon?" "Not if I can help it." "Good." They made love slowly, savoring each touch, each sensation. Talyn's control shattered beautifully under his hands, her cries filling the small space. Afterward, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her skin. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "We build something, the colony, our work, this," he squeezed her gently. "Whatever this is." "A partnership." "More than that." "Yes," she propped herself up to look at him. "Much more than that." A knock interrupted them. Brad groaned, reaching for pants. Talyn pulled on his shirt, the fabric hanging nearly to her knees. Pallas stood in the corridor looking apologetic. "Sorry to disturb you, there's been a development." "What kind?" Brad asked. 3 more colonies have reported similar migration patterns. They're requesting your expertise." Pallas hesitated. "Both of your expertise. The Council wants to establish a task force, human-alien cooperation for wildlife management across multiple settlements." Brad looked at Talyn. She grinned, fierce and bright. "When do we leave?" she asked. 2 days, that's enough time to prepare." "More than enough." Pallas departed and Brad pulled Talyn back inside. She laughed as he lifted her, carrying her back to bed. "A task force," she said. "We're going to be busy." No time for this, but she was already pulling his pants back off. "We'll make time." They did. That night and the next, they mapped each other thoroughly, memorizing responses and preferences. Rock spent most of his time outside, giving them space. The morning they departed, half the colony came to see them off. Brad loaded equipment while Talyn coordinated logistics. Rock prowled the perimeter, alert for threats that didn't exist. "Never thought I'd see the day," one colonist said, approaching Brad cautiously. "You and that creature, saving us all." "Rock's got a name." "Right, Rock," the man extended his hand. "Thank you for everything." Brad shook it, uncomfortable with gratitude, but he understood the gesture's importance. Talyn emerged from the transport, checking manifests. She'd pulled her hair back, revealing the elegant line of her neck. Brad's eyes caught on the mark he'd left there last night, visible above her collar. She noticed his attention and smiled. "Problem?" "No problem." "Good, we're ready when you are." They boarded together, Rock settling in the cargo bay with surprising grace. The transport lifted, and Brad watched the colony shrink below. He'd arrived here months ago, alone and uncertain. Now he had a partner, a purpose, and someone who'd chosen to walk beside him through whatever came next. Talyn's hand found his. "Nervous?" "Should I be?" 3 colonies, dozens of variables, no guarantee your methods will work everywhere. "They'll work." "How can you be sure?" Brad looked at her, at Rack visible through the bay window, at the violet star receding behind them. "Because it's not about the methods. It's about respect, understanding, building bridges instead of walls." Very philosophical. "I have my moments." She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Tell me something." "What?" "That first day in the council chamber, when you said Rack wouldn't bite because he knew I was yours." Her voice held curiosity. "Did you mean that, or was it just for show?" Brad thought back to that moment, the words that had escaped without planning. "I meant it, maybe not the way you heard it then, but some part of me already knew. Knew what? That you were going to change everything. She tilted her head up, kissing him softly. Good answer. The transport broke atmosphere, stars emerging in the viewport. Ahead lay new colonies, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that humans and aliens could build something together. I love you, he said. Talyn smiled against his lips. I know. You tell me with every touch, every look, every time you trust me to walk into danger beside you. Is it enough? It's everything. They sat together as the ship jumped to faster than light, the universe stretching around them. Rock's contented rumble vibrated through the deck plates. Somewhere ahead, people needed them. Creatures needed understanding. Bridges needed building. Brad had spent years on frontiers, solving problems others considered unsolvable. He'd faced predators and politics, danger and doubt, but he'd never had someone to share it with, someone who saw him completely and chose to stay anyway. He had that now. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The human, the alien, and the creature who'd brought them together. 3 beings from different worlds, building something new. Something that felt remarkably like home.